So this 4-week journey began with Jesus and his disciples around a table, remembering stories, holding out hope for a new way, a new economy, a new way of relating to each other, finding a new way of being together, a vision for how the church as it was to be, how it might be understood and seen and experienced in the neighborhood, in the world in which they lived. We end with Jesus, of course, and his disciples in virtually the same place. Maybe not around a table per se, but around the fire where a place of belonging and a meal was made. Disciples gathered, confused, around this meal, trying to figure out a way forward after Jesus had been lost, died, and found again in a new resurrected form. They were grieving, they were discombobulated, they were confused. Their entire lives had been turned upside down. This is a story that we hear often in the season of Easter, and I don't believe it needs to just be relegated to stay there forever, because every single Sunday we gather, it is the celebration of a little mini resurrection, is it not? Resurrection, not only as it shows up in our collective life together, but the little resurrections that we experience in our own lives, my life and your life, giving thanks to God for what has been and what we will become. So what they learned to be true was no longer in this Easter reality of Jesus being present and yet not of this world. And so they went to doing the very thing that they knew, as the human condition tends to have us do. They went fishing, right? We have all sorts of different images of maybe the thing that we do, you and I do, whenever we don't know what else is the right path or what the next right thing may be. You can fill that blank in your mind for yourself. But as they went fishing in the chaos and fear that was characterizing their lives, they caught nothing. And I imagine they had days here and there where that happened, but it wasn't often where that was the case. And Jesus called them from the shore, seeing what was happening, and he invited them to cast their nets on the other side of their boat. This simple change, you heard the story from Joanne's reading, it filled the nets with so much more fish than they could possibly eat. By a simple but profound change, and even more importantly, a simple but profound obedience given and heeded and received by God's invitation. Now, this was practical advice, right? But I do believe that this simple change was also symbolic. This whole month we've been working over these 4 weeks, whether you've joined us online or in person, from your travels or right here in this seat, we have been working on remembering, releasing, and reclaiming in our stories. But all of this has led to the restoring work of God that will continue to become active and more deepened in our lives today and in the days to come. At least that's what we trust and hope will be. We have been seeking restoration through the examination and confession of our relationships to money and how they were created by the stories that we were grafted into from even our youngest days. And then restoration in our belief in God's faithfulness, and I have seen even the growing courage that comes in the form of vulnerability among you. The conversations that you've had among each other that I'm privy to, and the questions you've asked me directly about some of your own reflections. Ultimately, Jesus was inviting them all to turn away from their past narratives that might have held them back or kept them afraid or questioning or perhaps paralyzed from doing anything new, or their fear of loss. And in the midst of turning away from those things, to turn toward the promise of resurrection that was active in their lives and surely is active in our own. It seems like Jesus was suggesting that we can't just tinker around where we place our nets, where we make choices in our lives or make bets or risks on things that seem like just little bitty shifts and changes. A lot of times, if not all the time, we are back to where we started when those things happen. We can't just do the same things that we know and expect different results. And so God, through the person of Jesus, was inviting them and us to see differently. So for us in this short meditation I'm offering this morning, I want to ask you, in your own story, in your own narrative, in the way that you've been formed and raised, and the story that you're living right now, the pages that you're writing, where is God inviting you perhaps to turn, to pivot, to go to the other side? What is the other side in your life? Maybe turning away from a certain practice, or turning away from maybe a fear that has kept you back, or a practice of spending that has maybe not been the healthiest for you, even an addiction. I know some of us in this room and others outside of it, that's the major piece that maybe came to mind when you hear this question. But in your own story, where might God be inviting you to turn or to cast to the other side that perhaps may make all the difference in your life or in the life of another? Today we have the opportunity. We have the opportunity to turn away from our former stories to make new ones. Because for many of us, those old money stories we've told to ourselves don't always work anymore. They gave us a foundation, an important one, but that foundation has to be constantly checked, re-examined, perhaps reimagined, and made new through God's perspective about what abundance looks like. Just like we serve a God who never stands still, a God who is not static, we are invited into God's forward movement in the world to discover what might be possible for you, for me, for us as a faith community. You know, I love this story that ends the Gospel of John. It is just so vivid with imagery and with an emotional reality that, if we are honest with ourselves, is our own all the time. This question that perhaps we see as our own from God, from Jesus: do you love me? Do you love me? Insert your name here. I know I feel this story deeply often when I read it. But one of my favorite parts of this story is not the one that we heard, but right after it, the very ending of the gospel and the last verses that follow the passage. I just want to remind you of what they are from verse 22 at the very end of the story that John tells in this chapter. Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world wouldn't have room for the books that would be written. Do you see it? This resurrection experience that was then and is now is not just a conclusion, but a continuation of the story. We haven't arrived at the end, but each new day for us is a new beginning. So today, let's be a part of a new approach about that new beginning, writing a new story for ourselves, for our children, for our community that we often serve as the only safety net that some of our neighbors experience in life, and for our collective future together. May we trust that as we each contribute to God's purpose in these sacred, ordinary days, that we're going to find ourselves overflowing with surprise at the reality that there is more than enough. In the name of God, who was and is to come. Amen.